In our last lesson, we talked about multiplying with integers. So we were taking whole numbers and multiplying them together. The same rules as far as signs work here. So when you have two numbers with the same sign and you're multiplying them, they're going to make a positive. Two numbers with opposite signs are going to result in a negative. Today we're going to add another step to that lesson by talking about multiplication and division with rational numbers. So to start, we need to look at what a rational number is. The first 5 letters of the word rational spell ratio, and a ratio is really just a fancy word for a fraction. So rational numbers are numbers that can be written as fractions. Whole numbers can be written as fractions. For example, the whole number 5, if we want to turn that into a fraction, we put it over 1. 0 can be written as a fraction. We can put any number underneath it because 0 divided by anything is going to give you 0. Doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. Negative 1/3 is a fraction. It's also a rational number. Negative 4 over 1 is a rational number. X can be a rational number by putting it over 1. So anything that we can turn into a fraction is a rational number. When we're multiplying rational numbers, the most important thing to do is to cross-reduce. So for example, if I want to multiply 9 by negative 1/3, the easiest thing to do is to turn any whole numbers that you have into fractions. And you've always been taught that you can multiply across the top and multiply across the bottom and reduce, which you're welcome to do. So in that result, we would have negative 9 over positive 3, which simplifies into negative 3. It's a negative because we have 1 negative, 1 positive. 3 goes into 9 3 times. However, if you cross-reduce before you move on, it simplifies things a little bit. So in other words, we can look at the number 3 and say 3 goes into 9 3 times. That takes care of everything in our denominator, and we're left with 3 times negative 1, which is negative 3. So that's an example of simplifying before you multiply. Sometimes there might be letters involved too. So again, we're going to put this over 1 so that we can think of them as both being fractions, both being rational numbers. 5 cancels, and it goes into 10 2 times. 2 has to stay on bottom, so be very careful. The 2 doesn't move up top. What we're really doing here when we reduce is we're dividing both the top and the bottom by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. Now, with what's left, we multiply across the top. X times 1 equals x. 1 times 2 is 2. And our result is a new rational number, x over 2, or 1/2 x. The 1 comes from the fact that there's an invisible 1 right here. It tells us how many x's we have, so we can pull that fraction out if we want to. So same idea here. Put it over 1. 2 goes into 8 4 times, and we're keeping that negative sign with the 4. Notice that we have an A on top and an A on bottom. Way back in our lesson on the property of reciprocals, what we know is that when we multiply two reciprocals, they cancel out. A and 1 over A are reciprocals, so they go away. So now we're left with negative 4b times 1, which is negative 4b. And on bottom, we just have 1, which we don't have to write. Now let's talk a little bit about division. Dividing by fractions has a very specific rule that people often forget, but it really has to be memorized. The rule is this: dividing by a number is the same thing as multiplying by that number's reciprocal. So, in order to continue with this problem, what I really need to do is to turn this problem into a multiplication problem. The first number, the 5, just drops down. Nothing happens to it. I'm going to change division into multiplication, and I'm going to change 1/5 into its reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1 over 5 is 5 over 1. All it does is flip, it keeps the sign. And now I'm just multiplying. 5 times 5 is 25. Again, I don't have to put it over 1. It's implied that it's there. So let me state that very clearly. Dividing by a number means multiplying by the reciprocal. This rule needs to be memorized. You have to remember to do this. Now here's a pretty simple division problem, probably one that you can do in your head. 21 divided by 7 is 3. 7 goes into 21 3 whole times. But just to illustrate that this is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, let's drop down the 21, turn division into multiplication. The reciprocal of 7 we find by putting it over 1 and then flipping it. It's going to be 1 over 7. Now notice if we go back to what we were just doing a moment ago, we would put 21 over 1. We would cancel out the 7. We're cross-reducing. 7 goes away. 21 becomes a 3. 3 times 1 is 3. Now in this situation, it was probably a few more steps than just doing this in your head. But I wanted to illustrate that even when you do straight division, you're still following this rule. You're multiplying by the reciprocal. It's just that sometimes it's easier to multiply by the reciprocal in our own heads. Other times, you have to really write out your steps. So let's try another. So 12 divided by negative 1 over 4, negative 1/4. The most common thing that I see people doing is just pretending this is a division problem, a multiplication problem, and just multiplying it, and they end up with negative 3. That is not the answer. Because if you do that, all you're saying is that multiplying and dividing are the same thing, and they're not. So we're going to change this into multiplication, and we're going to make negative 1 over 4 become its reciprocal, negative 4 over 1. Now we multiply, and we get negative 48. What this is really saying in words is that 12 is 1/4 of what we have. 12 is 1/4 of the stuff that we have. So in order to figure out how much is the total stuff we have, we multiply it by 4. So 12 equaling 1/4 means that we actually have 48 things. And again, the signs go along with 1 positive times 1 negative makes a negative number. Hopefully at this point you're seeing the pattern, but let's try another to make sure. Negative 15 divided by negative 1 over 3. Negative divided by negative is going to make a positive. If it helps you, you can flip the signs right from the very beginning. Now, dividing by a fraction means the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. 15 drops down. Division turns into multiplication. This becomes 3 over 1. 15 times 3 is 45. Again, in words, 15 is 1/3 of the stuff. So all of the stuff is 45. Sometimes we might see something that looks kind of complicated because it's a fraction inside a fraction. Something like that. 10 divided by 1/2. It may help you to remember that a fraction bar is the same thing as a division sign. So we can rewrite this problem like that. and then follow the rules of multiplying by the reciprocal that we were just doing. The 10 drops down, division becomes multiplication, 1 over 2 becomes 2 over 1. And again, in words, this is saying 10 is half of what we have. So if 10 is half of what we have, then we must have 20 items. We're going to do one more problem with a little bit of distributive property thrown in there, just to make sure you're good. And at that point, you can feel free to start on the problems. So, this is still the distributive property, even though there's a fraction there. It may help you to make those look like fractions too, or to say this out in words. What you're asking for is 1/2 of this minus 1/2 of that. So if I write that out, I have 1/2, remember of means times, 1/2 of 6a gives me 3a, cross reduce, minus 1/2 of 4b, again, cross reduce, which is 2b. So my resulting expression, 3a minus 2b, can't go any further because this is made of a's, that's made of b's. So there you have it. That is a quick lesson on multiplying rational numbers and dividing rational numbers. At this point, you can get started on your problems.